Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In this chapter, we are going to be talking about the rightly guided caliphs. So let's go for that. First off, the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought the questions of the leadership to Medina. So before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was even buried, a group of leading figures from among the Meccan immigrants and the people of Medina gathered to answer the question of the leadership. There may have even been some proposals for two-state solution, one led by Madinese and one by Makkan. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anha nominated Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha to be the political leader of a unified Muslim state based in Medina. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha was from the people of Makkah, but no one, neither from the Muhajirun nor the Ansar, could dispute his qualification. So he was perfect for that role. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha 632 CE to 634 CE. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha took the title of Khalifatul Rasul, meaning successor of the Messenger of God, shortened as Khalifa or Caliph in English, in 632 CE. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha dispatched an expeditionary force to the southern Syria to battle with the Byzantines in retaliation for an earlier confrontation between the two sides. Now, from the sandy desert to the east of Medina, the various Bedouin tribes that had recently converted to Islam began to rebel. So they refused to pay the zakat tax, which is an important pillar of the Islam, and they also accepted some false prophets as their prophets, which led the Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha to declare that they had left the fold of Islam. Military action had to be taken by Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha. He appointed Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu ta'ala anha as the commander of an army to be sent east to crush the rebel movement. And this is the map showing the Khalid ibn al-Walid's campaign in the Ridda Wars. These are called apostasy wars or Ridda wars, Ridda in Arabic. After successfully defeating Medina from any possible attacks by the rebels, Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu ta'ala anha led the army eastward to where the numerous rebelling tribes were based. So the rebels were routed and Musaylima was killed in the battle. One by one, armies loyal to the caliphate spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula. By 633 CE, the wars of apostasy or Ridda wars were over, and the entire Arabian Peninsula was once again united as a Muslim state. This is the map showing again the Ridda wars, which I have shown previously, but this is different map, and it is from the book Atlas of the Islamic Conquest, which I presented in the first chapter of this book, or first lecture of this book. Another achievement or another important work of Abu Bakr's life is the preservation of the Quran in the written form and one, let's say, in one piece or in one manuscript. So Abu Bakr's life as a caliph was significant for the preservation of the Quran in written form. During the Prophet's life, numerous secretaries were assigned to write down new revelations of the Quran as they came to him. These manuscripts were not compiled into one bound book. So the written pieces of the Quran were not as important as its memorization word for word. During the Abu Bakr's caliphate, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anha suggested that all the various manuscripts be collected, checked against the memories of the reliable companions for accuracy, and stored in a central location. So despite Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha's initial hesitance to do something that the Prophet himself had not done, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha went along with the plan, and a collection of the Quranic manuscript was assembled in the Medina. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha's caliphate lasted a mere 2 years, from 632 to his death in 634 CE. In those 2 years, he managed to stabilize the Muslim state after the death of the Prophet and prime it to take advantage of the imperial powers to the north. The last precedent that Abu Bakr set was through the nomination of his successor. Rather than choose a relative of his to lead his community after his death, he chose someone who he believed was most qualified and capable of handling the job. radiallahu ta'ala anha. And he was obviously right in his choice. And this actually ends the era of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha, which was very short, but it was very important in terms of stabilizing the Ummah and stabilizing an emerging empire, which would take the advantage of the other imperial powers and would expand in other territories. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anha from 634 CE to 644 CE. Unlike Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha, and Umar did not have to deal with questions of political stability. The massive military effort that spread throughout the peninsula in the wars of apostasy gave the Muslim state the confidence and skills to begin thinking seriously about territorial expansion to the north, partly to remove chances of inter-Islamic conflict and partly to provide security to the few Arab tribes that were converting to Islam within Byzantine and Sassanid borders. The Muslim armies turned north, where their greatest conquests would come. Raids into Sassanid-controlled Mesopotamia already began during the last years of Abu Bakr's life and continued once Umar radiallahu ta'ala took power. So we have uh, Battle of Ajnadan, and before that we have some other battles. But as we are not studying the history in the detail, so we are just going to be overviewing things and skipping some battles. Unlike the campaigns of destruction that the two empires had waged, the Muslim calls for war were combined with the calls for justice and social harmony consistent with the message of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Armies were simultaneously sent into Syria and Mesopotamia in 633. So there are two armies. One has been sent to Mesopotamia, which is you can say Iraq, and the other one is Syria. Khalid ibn al-Walid led the detachment headed towards the Persians in Mesopotamia, and Yazid, the son of Abu Sufyan, led the armies sent to Syria, very quickly managed to defeat a Byzantine force near Gaza. Emperor Heraclius ordered the imperial army to mobilize and prepare to crush the Arabs before they were able to consolidate their victory. So Khalid radiallahu ta'ala was ordered to immediately leave Iraq or Mesopotamia, where he had already had some success. So he fought there some battles and won very amazingly. So you can read for the details from detailed history books. And then he traveled across the waterless Syrian desert to reinforce the army there, and that is also a very important event. The march of Khalid bin Walid through the Syrian desert. And then the combined Muslim forces met the Byzantines at the Battle of Ajnadan, about 30 kilometers west of Jerusalem, where the Muslim armies completely routed the imperial force. This is Mesopotamia, which you can see as it is mostly the Iraq and some part of Syria. I just wanted to show you that this is Mesopotamia. And this is the invasion of Khalid radiallahu ta'ala and Iyad bin Ghanam radiallahu ta'ala on Iraq or Mesopotamia. This is Khalid radiallahu ta'ala march through the Sawama desert to Syria, or the perilous march of Khalid ibn al-Walid. This is location of Ajnadan. Here the battle was fought, and Muslims completely routed the imperial army. Then we have the siege of Damascus. So the Muslim armies under the command of Khalid ibn al-Walid moved north and laid siege to the ancient city of Damascus, which fell in September 635 CE. Umar promised that their lives, property, and religion would be safeguarded from any harassment so long as the tribute to Muslim government was paid. This set the tone for the fighting. That is, it was aimed at the Byzantine government and the army, not the civilians. With such guarantees, there would be much lower chances of rebellions by the Syrian population. This is the advancement of the Muslim army towards north and the siege of Damascus. So they moved from Ajnadan to Damascus, as you can see in the map. Then the Battle of Yarmouk, very important battle. in the history of Islam and even in the history of whole world, I would say. The loss of Damascus caused the Byzantine emperor to assemble an even larger force with the hopes of sending the Arabs back into the desert for good. Khalid ibn al-Walid ta'ala knew his raiding force was no match for the bulk of imperial army and decided to withdraw southwards. Eventually, Heraclius' army caught up with the Muslim force at Yarmouk along the border of present-day Jordan and Syria in the summer of 636 CE. The Byzantine force was much larger, better equipped, and better trained, but morale was low. Taking advantage of this and the familiarity of Arabs head fighting in rough terrain, the Muslim force decisively defeated the Byzantines. Emperor Heraclius was forced to concede defeat in Syria. Cities throughout Syria fell one by one, and by 638 CE, the conquest of Syria was complete. This is how the Muslim army moved toward Yarmouk and the other army. So the green one is Muslim army. It moved to Damascus and then it moved back and then it moved back to the Yarmouk. And the red one is the Roman army. So after the conquest of Syria, from there the fighting against the Byzantines continued in Egypt, which fell relatively quickly by 642 CE. To help sort out the civil administration of the region, Umar personally traveled from Medina to Syria. One of his first actions in the country was to relieve Khalid ibn al-Walid of his post. This no doubt shocked everyone, including Khalid himself. When it came to governorship of the new province, Umar appointed Muawiyah, the son of Makkan aristocrat Abu Sufyan. While Umar was in Syria, he personally attended the surrender of Jerusalem in 637 CE. He was given a guided tour of the city by the patriarch Sophronius, an Arab Christian who had risen to become one of the leading figures of the Greek church in Jerusalem. The new governor of Jerusalem allowed Jews to come to the city to worship for the first time in over 500 years. So the Jews were not allowed to come into the city. They were massacred when they were when the Roman army came there. So they were not allowed to live there, and it was like after 500 years they were coming back to Jerusalem due to Hazrat Umar the rule there. This precedent of freedom and religious pluralism was based on Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's constitution of Medina, which Umar was, of course, intricately familiar with. While acknowledging the rights of Christians and Jews, Umar was keen to send the message that this city also belonged to Islam. So then we have another important Battle of Qadisiyah, which also happened in 636, so the same year of Battle of Yarmouk. After the fall of Syria, so the attention of the Caliph went back to the Sassanid Empire. So the Battle of Yarmouk was with the Roman Empire, and the Battle of Qadisiyah is with Sassanid Empire. Umar appointed another veteran of Arab warfare who fought with the Prophet, Saad ibn Abi Waqas to lead the Muslim armies into Mesopotamia. So before this, Khalid ibn Walid had some success there, but then he was ordered to move to Syria to help the army at the Battle of Hajin, as we have seen earlier. So now Umar appointed Saad ibn Abi Waqas to move towards Mesopotamia. Despite initial setbacks due to the Arabs' inability to deal with war elephants, Sa'd ibn Waqqas army managed to defeat the Persians at the Battle of Qadisiyah in late 636. These are the roads to Qadisiyah. So you can stop the video and see the map. This is the departure of the armies to Qadisiyah. Again, you can stop the video to see the map for more time. We have Ctesiphon, or Madain as it is called. If the Muslims were wanted to hold Iraq, they would have to take Ctesiphon, which is the Sassanid capital. Ctesiphon was not a well-defended city. It lay on the plain between Tigris and Euphrates rivers. about 60 kilometers north of the ancient city of Babylon. After a siege that lasted about 2 months in early 637 CE, the imperial city fell to the Muslim forces. The entire Tigris-Euphrates plain was now firmly under the control of the Muslim armies, with the Sassanid emperor and his government fleeing into the Persian highlands. This is the Ctesiphon you can see in the map, which you can see in three dots in the region of Iraq. Umar Anhu's time as caliph is noteworthy not just for his military conquests but also his administration over conquered territories. Life barely changed for most inhabitants of the conquered lands. Monophysite Christians who differed from the ruling Greek Orthodox on matters of the nature of the Christ were allowed to practice their religion in Syria. Jews were similarly relieved of official oppression and were allowed to go back to their holiest city, Jerusalem, to worship. Nestorian Christians saw increased religious freedom as the ruling Zoroastrians had routinely restricted their freedoms on suspicions of being secretly allied with Christian Byzantine Empire. End of Umar Anhu's caliphate. So, through the 10 years as the caliph of the Muslim world, Umar Anhu had taken the young Muslim state from a desert based raiding society to a regional power. This rapid expansion, coupled with social stability, is the proof of this incredible capabilities as an administrator and leader. His reign came to a sudden end in 644 when he was murdered in Medina by a Persian slave who had a personal grudge against this charismatic leader. While on his deathbed, Umar appointed a council of six well respected leaders of the community of Medina to choose his successor from among themselves. They chose Usman bin Affan and other early convert to Islam. Seeing the success of Umar's policies, Usman promised to follow in Umar's footsteps, which led to his appointment in late 644 CE. Now we would see Hazrat Usman's caliphate, 644 CE to 656 CE. Usman has descent from an aristocratic family played a huge role in his decisions as caliph. His cousin Muawiyah was already the governor of Syria and was doing an admirable job in transitioning the province from a frontier territory to the backbone of the Muslim state. Usman proceeded to appoint his foster brother Abdullah ibn Sa'd as the governor of Egypt. Other cousins of his were appointed in Iraq, where they led raids into Persian homeland, slowly conquering the rest of the Sassanid Empire. Usman ordered the construction of the first naval fleet in Muslim history, intended to thwart any Byzantine counterattacks. Governors in Syria and Egypt relied heavily on the expertise of the local Christians in building seafaring vessels. Many of them belonged to the Coptic Church and other Christian denominations that were not recognized by the Byzantines. A Byzantine fleet attempting to recapture Alexandria in 646 CE was thwarted by Christian sailors in the employ of the Caliphate. The Muslim Empire was able to expand its influence in the Mediterranean, capturing Cyprus and Crete and raiding as far away as Sicily. So these are uh, Cyprus, Crete, and Sicily. You can also see more detail of the conquest of Crete, Sicily, and Cyprus on this map, which you can see by stopping the video. And this map is again from the book Atlas of the Islamic Conquest. During Usman's caliphate, a Muslim embassy was sent to China to establish diplomatic relations between the caliphate and the Tang dynasty. This is the Great Mosque of Xi'an, China, which dates to the 8th century, which is really amazing. Further conquests. Military success also continued on land as Muawiyah led his powerful Syrian army into Armenia against Byzantine rule. The mountainous terrain of Anatolia, coupled with its mainly Greek population, meant a natural border between the Byzantines and the Muslims developed around the modern border of Turkey and Syria. Further east, Muslim armies continued to push into the Persian heartland under the command of another of Usman's relatives, Abdullah ibn Amr. The conquest of the rest of Sassanid Empire was not as rapid as the conquest of Iraq. Here, the society was more homogeneous and connected to the Sassanid government. This is again the map of conquest of Armenia and Azerbaijan, Iranian plateau. Sassanid Emperor Yazdigal was never able to fully replace the army he lost in 642 CE, and over the following 10 years, the Sassanids were constantly on the defensive. By 650 CE, the Iranian plateau was secured, and by 651 CE, Khorasan was taken. That same year, the last Sassanid king was found while on the run and executed. Within a decade, the Muslim armies had pushed into from Iraq to the River Oxus, reaching the edge of Central Asia. For Usman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, leading a rapid military expansion like Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu did not result in the same popularity as the second caliph. In 656, a group of soldiers from Egypt came to Medina to protest directly to the caliph regarding his policies and the division of spoils between the army and the civil government in Egypt. He listened to both sides of the dispute and promised to take steps to solve the problem equitably. On their return to Egypt, the soldiers intercepted a letter supposedly written by the caliph to the governor of Egypt ordering their execution. They returned to Medina and besieged Usman in his own house. Despite the mortal danger he was in, Usman refused to order that the people of Medina arm themselves and fire the rebels. Many of the remaining companions of the Prophet ﷺ opposed this mutiny but were powerless to stop it. The rebels eventually forced their way into Usman anhu's house and murdered him as he sat reading his copy of the Quran. There you can see rebellions against Usman and the Kharijite region, which they came from the Fustat region to Medina, and then they went back, and then they came back to Medina, and there they murdered Usman radiallahu ta'ala. And you can see the Kufa and Jamal origins as well, which we are going to talk later. So Ali radiallahu ta'ala from 656 to 661 CE. As the kingmakers of Medina, the rebels sought to appoint a new caliph themselves. Ali radiallahu ta'ala was the natural choice, as he was the most respected companion still alive. Ali radiallahu ta'ala initially refused to be appointed by people who had rebelled against the caliphate. He was eventually persuaded by other leading figures in Medina that he was most qualified and best equipped to bring back peace to the Muslim world. Ali radiallahu ta'ala's most pressing problem was dealing with the murders of Usman radiallahu ta'ala. There was popular sentiment in favor of punishing the rebels. Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala even insisted that he would not pledge allegiance to the new caliph until steps were taken to punish the people who killed his cousin. Ali radiallahu ta'ala knew that to punish them would likely lead to his own assassination, and this would in turn force the Muslim world into a downward spiral of bloodshed that he was keen to avoid. So then the civil war happened. He moved his his capital to Kufa in the fertile plain of Iraq, where support ran high for the caliph. Soon, a force gathered with the intention of convincing Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu to punish them, led by Talha radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and aided by the Prophet's wife Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. The army departed for Iraq to confront Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. On both sides, there were people who were close to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and must have been aware of the severity of fighting among Muslims. For Ali radiallahu ta'ala, punishing them was not politically feasible, as he believed the best solution was to move on and attempt to reunify the Ummah. For his opponents, reunification was impossible without fixing wrongs and sending the message that the caliphate could not be violated as it was during the siege of Usman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So this is the Kufa map. So you can see it is in the Iraq, and Ali radiallahu ta'ala moved from Medina to Kufa. And you can see this is like the distance they have to cover. Then, unfortunate Battle of Camel. Eventually, in 656 CE, the supporting armies of the opposing ideas met at a field near Basra in southern Iraq. Some members of the opposition, including Talha and Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, met with Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu before the battle, hoping to avoid bloodshed. Less pious-minded extremists on both sides still urged the soldiers to come to blows with each other, despite the negotiations of their leaders. In the confusion, the two armies finally collided, each believing the other side had started the fighting. Talha radiallahu ta'ala anha and Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anha were both killed in the mayhem. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha retired back to her home in Medina and dissociated herself from politics until her death in 678 CE. Muawiyah had remained neutral in the conflict but continued to withhold his allegiance until Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu punished his cousin's murderers. To prevent further bloodshed, Ali radiallahu anhu agreed to meet with Muawiyah radiallahu anhu to settle their dispute through arbitration. The two sides met at a site midway between Iraq and Syria, their respective bases of support in 658 CE. Exactly what happened at the negotiations and their outcome is difficult to judge through the fog of the history, but it seems that the arbitrators favored a solution that removed both Ali and Muawiyah anhuma from both power and resulted in the election of a new caliph. A group of Ali's supporters decreed the results, refusing to accept the legitimacy of the arbitration itself. After separating from the main body of Ali radiallahu anhu's supporters, they were given the name Khawarij or Kharijites, meaning the ones who left. Ali radiallahu anhu, who had rejected the results of the arbitration as being invalid, decided that his former supporters could not be allowed to go about with the reign of terror. He assembled his army and confronted the opposition in the summer of 658 CE, where the main body of the Khariji support was destroyed. The movement continued the more clandestine form with the aim of removing both Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. An attempt to assassinate Muawiyah in Damascus by the Kharijis was unsuccessful, but they succeeded in killing Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. As he prayed the dawn prayers at the mosque of Kufa, an assassin stabbed the caliph radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And that is the end of this chapter. And in the next, inshallah, we are going to be talking about the next chapter of this book, which is the establishment of the Muslim state, in which he talks about the Umayyad Caliphate and the start of the Abbasid Caliphate and their control of the whole area.